BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And once again on this week's Zodiac Monday, I will be joined later in the program by Sam Fisher. He is the author of The Zodiac Killer Identity, and I will also be responding to the newest video on the channel Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World about the Zodiac Killer Hoax theory. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. And because this week's Zodiac Monday is a Zodiac Killer news report, I would also like to drop a couple of news items with you guys. Ross Geraci of the Planet X Filmworks channel has publicly challenged Alex Baber to a true crime debate. Alex Baber is the subject of the Killer in the Code podcast, and he has a Zodiac Killer suspect named Marvin Margolis, whom he also accuses of committing the Black Dahlia murder in 1947, and I simply responded to Ross by saying that if he needs a moderator, I am fully willing to step in as a guest moderator. Ross created the Zodiac Killer debate files in 2023. If he wants to do it on his channel, I'm fine. If he wants to use Black Box Online Radio, I would also offer my channel as a platform for that particular debate. And even if I'm not involved, I would absolutely be one of the first people who's going to be sitting there and watching that. So let's see if Alex Baber is going to accept Ross Geraci's challenge. Also, there is a new report available on ZodiacKiller.com. It's some information that Tom Voigt has shared in the past, but this is the 56-page report from 1975 on unsolved female homicides, an analysis of a series of unsolved murders in California and Western America. And this is looking at serial killer activity in the western part of the United States in 1975, just at the tail end of the Zodiac Killer's reign of terror, actually, because the Zodiac committed the murders in 1968 and 69, then the letters went into 1971, there's the Holt and Zodiac activity for 72 and 73, then the letters restarted again in 74, but there were other homicides that took place. Countless homicides took place in the early 1970s, most notably the Santa Rosa hitchhiker slayings. And one more time, this report is available for downloads in PDF format for free at ZodiacKiller.com, and that was the February 26, 2026 post. And we are counting down the days to the release of the new book from Eddie McNamara called Zodiactually, all about a variant of the Zodiac hoax theory, which we're going to be talking about later. But yes, Zodiactually, the real story of a fake serial killer. So I'm looking forward to that one, and I also look forward to discussing that one with you guys here on Black Box Online Radio. And there is a new essay that has been written by Matteo Ferrari that is available on Amazon.com, and it's labeled as an essay, but it is available in ebook and print format. And this is one that is called Material Triad and Geoprofiling of the Zodiac Killer. And that might sound like a very big title, that might sound like some heavy reading, but this one is actually a very smooth read, and it has a very easy flow to it. Material Triad and Geoprofiling of the Zodiac Killer. And I would like to just read the description for you right now. This essay is not a novel or a narrative story. It is a brief, concise dossier and forensic report focusing on the technical signature of a suspect. And the suspect that is explored in this essay is named Joseph Steven Holt, and he was a real murderer who had connections to the Lake Tahoe areas. And his logistical overlap with the Zodiac Killer between 1966 and 1979. Through the analysis of geoprofiling, the material triad, military footwear, specialist instrumentation, and the author's work, the author identifies an aeronautical logistic bridge that provided the suspect, referred to as Tim, access to non-civilian materials and strategic mobility between the Bay Area and Tahoe. And when it says that word Tim there, that name Tim, if you do read this essay by Matteo Ferrari, you will see that the suspect is simply referred to as Tim. That was a pseudonym that had been attributed to Joseph Steven Holt throughout the work. However, Matteo Ferrari has updated his description, and he wants everybody to be very clear that he's referring to Joseph Steven Holt. From the Sherry Jo Bates homicide to the resolution of the Anderson case via DNA in 2019, the text connects the patterns of mechanical sabotage, tinkering, to the subject's professional career in the real estate sector. And when he says tinkering, if you do read this, one thing that you'll find is that Matteo Ferrari is looking at how methodical and mechanical some murders can be, where in the Sherry Jo Bates case, the tinkering is rather self-explanatory. Somebody tampered with her car to drain the battery so she would have car trouble and would be unable to start her Volkswagen Bug. And there are several other examples throughout the Zodiac's reign of terror that Matteo Ferrari will highlight, and those were some interesting things. A logical deductive reconstruction transmitted to the authorities in January of 2026 aimed at soliciting a definitive comparison of forensic data with the CODIS system. The 2019 DNA breakthrough, how forensic science confirmed that the South Lake Tahoe suspect and its implications for the 60s Bay Area murders. And there is an author's note here. While subjective debates continue among hobbyists, the dossier remains the only analytical work anchored to the forensic evidence of Joseph Steven Holt. The author refers to this suspect as Tim, and that is a methodological mirror for analytical neutrality. And one more time, the name of this essay is Material, Triad, and Geoprofiling of the Zodiac Killer, and it's available on Amazon.com. And yes, I have read this one, and I have to give credit to Matteo Ferrari. He put in some very hard work into this, and it's written, though, in a very easy-to-read manner. I know that description and the title sound like there might be some very heavy reading that is placed upon you guys. But I particularly liked certain sections of this essay, most notably about the Kathleen Johns incident, and longtime listeners of Black Box Online Radio will be aware that I do not believe the Kathleen Johns incident was genuine Zodiac activity, but Matteo Ferrari still made some very good points. But the absolutely most fascinating parts were the discussions on the Lake Tahoe crimes that took place, because as previously stated, Joseph Steven Holt was a real murderer, and one of the murders that he committed was that of Bryn Rainey in 1977, and she is very similar to Donna Lass. Bryn Rainey worked at the same place that Donna Lass worked, the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino, which has been renamed numerous times over the years. One of the odd things is Donna Lass worked the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift at the nurse's station in the Sahara Tahoe, and when her shift would conclude, she would actually hang out in the casino, sitting at the tables, because she didn't want to walk home in the dark. Bryn Rainey worked the shift right after that, the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift at the Sahara Tahoe. So what she would do is she would go to the bar before her shift would start. And, I mean, I cannot deny the fact that Joseph Steven Holt sounds like a person of interest in the Donna Lass case, and I was even telling Matteo that, there is this very large time frame of approximately 7 years between the murders, and he just simply said that shouldn't discount him at all. Serial killers can operate over periods of time like that, and I do agree. I have to admit, he's right. So one more time, the essay is called Material, Triad, and Geoprofiling of the Zodiac Killer by Matteo Ferrari. Now, I told you guys that I was going to be discussing the newest video from Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and it is on the Zodiac Killer Hoax theory. He is releasing a series of videos on the hoax theory, the idea that the murders in 1968 and 69 were not committed by a single person, but rather somebody was writing letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit. Eddie McNamara is going to explore a lot of this in his new book, Zodiactually, but Thomas Henry Horan wrote a book previously called The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, which is what Jimmy Akin is using for his channel. And I wanted to start out this week by apologizing for my comments last week, because what I wanted to say was that I felt that I was overly critical, overly harsh, that I was saying too many negative things about Jimmy Akin's channel, and he covers various subjects. He did a 3-part series about the Zodiac Killer previously, and now he's released his second video in the Zodiac Killer Hoax series. And I wanted to apologize for being too harsh on his channel, because I really did appreciate that he put in some thought into the Zodiac Killer mystery, and he's just giving his original take on the subject. He's giving his responses and sharing his own personal analysis, the way that a lot of us do, the way that I do here on Black Box Online Radio, and the way that you guys can in the comments section. And as always, one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe, drop some comments below. I wanted to apologize, but I can't. I can't now, because I was watching his second video on the Zodiac Killer Hoax theory, and I made it 9 minutes in. 9 minutes in, and I had to turn it off. And I don't normally have that type of response about a Zodiac Killer video. It's just, he got so many things wrong. And it's not that he got mistakes wrong in a factual way, and it's like, oh, you're misrepresenting the narrative of the Zodiac Killer. No. His specific intent with his second Zodiac Hoax video was to outline the theory of the Zodiac Killer case. He said that in part 1. He wanted to steelman Thomas Henry Horan's theory, to articulate how the Zodiac Killer Hoax theory should have functioned. I told you, 9 minutes in, I couldn't do it. I couldn't listen to any more. Firstly, there are some technical errors, such as saying that the Zodiac Killer allegedly made a phone call on July 5th of 1969 at approximately, or not approximately, at 12:40 a.m. And what Jimmy Akin was saying is, now, the Blue Rock Springs shooting occurred at 12:10 a.m. That would only provide a possible time of maybe 10 minutes for the authorities to arrive at 12:20 to get Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau, take them to the hospital, and that would only leave 20 minutes from the time that the ambulance was at Blue Rock Springs to the phone call coming in at 12:40. And already, I'm sure some of the listeners of Black Box Online Radio will have a problem with that. The shooting did not occur at 12:10 a.m. And again, that's not something that is really open for discussion, because 12:10 is not the time of the shooting. The shooting most likely occurred at around, I've estimated in the past, 11:55 p.m. on July 4th. Some people have longer estimates, and they think that it was maybe 11:59, maybe 12 a.m. or 12:01 on July 5th. But 12:10 is when the call came in, when people found the bodies and they alerted the authorities. That was at 12:10 a.m. So already, there's another 10 to 15 minutes that can be added to the timeline. And that's very important. If you're going to say that, well, this theory can't work because there's not enough time from 12:20 to 12:40, well, that part of the timeline isn't accurate. So I guess that's kind of just null and void at that point. But there are some other major issues about, why I chose to turn this video off 9 minutes in. And after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, we have that phone call at 12:40 a.m. where somebody is saying, if you go 1 mile east on the Columbus Parkway, you'll find 2 kids that were shot in a car with a 9mm Luger. I'm the one who did it. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. And the famous goodbye at the end, right? Okay, so what Jimmy Akin said in his video was, now, for somebody to have that type of information, they would had to have gone to the crime scene, saw the shells, looked inside the car, saw Mike Mageau and Darlene Ferrin, recognized the shells as 9mm Luger shells, and then decided to go to the payphone and make the call and report a crime that they didn't commit. And he's playing the plausible deniability card, and also working with his 12:20 timeline, the shooting occurred at 12:10 and somebody arrives, I guess 12:15 to 12:20, which is out of the question, and it is out of the question for an even bigger reason. How about Thomas Henry Horan never claimed any of that somebody went to the crime scene, saw the shells, and then went to the payphone? In the Zodiac Hoax theory, he said very clearly that somebody was listening in to the police scanner, to the radio, and they were listening to the comments that were made by investigators, and that person made a prank phone call. I repeat, a prank phone call. And this has nothing to do with going to the crime scene and looking at the shells that were on the ground and seeing two bloody bodies in the back of a car, or Darlene would have been in the front seat. This has to do with somebody getting information from the police radio and then making a prank call without any specific information. And as Horan has postulated in the past, this whole thing about "I also killed those kids last year" is a vague and ambiguous statement. That doesn't say anything about Lake Herman Road. It doesn't say anything about David Faraday or Betty Lou Jensen. I also killed those kids last year. And then, once this information became public knowledge, or not public knowledge, but known throughout the circles of law enforcement, somebody would have had 3 weeks to concoct their Zodiac Killer hoax plan. 3 weeks. The call came on July 5th, and the Zodiac debut letter not until July 31st. So if somebody is going to steelman the hoax theory, I would like to present it like this, and then I'll provide a challenge. And that is that it would start out with David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered either for a drug-related reason, David Faraday ratting somebody out for selling drugs, or that it was simply just done because some people decided to shoot them because they were in a vulnerable place, and this would fall into the category of something that's unrelated to the Zodiac crimes. Then Darlene Ferrin would have been shot because she was trying to set up her ex-husband, Jim Phillips Crabtree, in a sting operation, and she was going to Blue Rock Springs to buy drugs, and she also wanted Jim Phillips Crabtree to be there. And that it was a sting operation that backfired. Either Crabtree figured it out or the drug dealer figured it out and shot Darlene Ferrin. And this was another point that was also miscategorized by Jimmy Akin in his video 9 minutes in, when he said that Thomas Horan didn't have suspects for the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Absolutely false. And here's one. Jimmy Akin was clearly not using the documentary version of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, where they interview Jim Phillips Crabtree. That's one thing. But even in the book, which he was using as a source, there is a suspect that is mentioned, and his name is Richard Hoffman, although it's presented as a question. Was Hoffman the shooter? There's one sentence in the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. Was Hoffman the shooter? Richard Hoffman, of course, was the first police officer on site, and only accusing him of the Darlene Ferrin murder, not of anything else. That could have been done for a personal grudge, but the whole point would be it was a sting operation that backfired. The other two suspects that were named were Donald Warren Porter, who was the drug dealer, and Jim Phillips Crabtree, and Thomas Horan might be speculating there, but it was a sting operation that backfired. Darlene Ferrin was the informant, and she's trying to set up Crabtree in this, so he would be arrested because she wants revenge on her ex-husband, and somebody decided to cross the line and murder Darlene Ferrin, and Mike Mageau would have just been caught in the crossfire. He would have just been purely wrong place, wrong time, hanging out with the wrong person on the wrong night, and that's why he was shot. So we have a drug-related or gang-related issue for Lake Herman Road. We have the botched sting operation for Blue Rock Springs, and then the police are talking on the radio, and someone has gathered this information, and they make a prank call. I repeat, a prank call. And they call in saying, "Oh yes, if you'll find the two kids in the car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I'm the one who did it. I also killed those kids last year." Absolutely vague and not precise. Then somebody decided to start writing letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit because he knew that these crimes would not be solved because they were dealing with confidential informants. Darlene Ferrin at Blue Rock Springs, possibly David Faraday at Lake Herman Road, or it could have been the shooter was an informant. There's a theory involving David Walliott in that. Okay, then, with Lake Berryessa, multiple possibilities have been proposed, but ultimately, that could have been a copycat. That was somebody who learned about the Zodiac persona from the papers. That was somebody who practiced the handwriting of the Zodiac Killer from seeing it on August 4th of 1969 in the Vallejo Times-Herald, and the symbol, all of that stuff. Lake Berryessa was a copycat, which is why the Zodiac didn't take an enormous amount of credit for it in the letters, only saying, I'm the one who did in the kids in the North Bay area. That's it. That's all the Zodiac is saying about Lake Berryessa in the letters. Then you get to the Stein murder, and the Stein murder was committed by an individual who was a Jordanian immigrant named Heshem Zayed, who was somebody who was just committing a taxi robbery. He was a criminal who committed the Stein murder simply to steal Paul Stein's wallet. So there were suspects in these cases. And as far as how the killer would have obtained this information, they would have done it by reading police reports. The police reports for Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. And Thomas Horan points out a very key detail in regards to the reading of the police reports, and that is that when Darlene Ferrin was shot, she was wearing something that was called a slack dress. And in the police reports it says that, but perhaps the killer didn't know what a slack dress was, or perhaps the person who read the report didn't know what a slack dress was, and their brain interpreted it as dress slacks. So then they decided to write out the facts that only they and the police know. In the Zodiac Killer's debut letter, to prove that I am the killer, I shall state some facts that only I and the police know. What did this person say? That she was wearing patterned slacks as opposed to a slack dress. And or that at the very least, it was a dress that had pant legs. Some people have disputed the term slack dress. They called it a tank top dress or whatever. The point is, it's a dress that has pant legs on it that was apparently fashionable in the 1960s. And then that is like something that I do stand by to this day, that Horan may have made an interesting observation about in regards to somebody taking credit for the Blue Rock Springs crime when it wasn't actually the Zodiac Killer. So you have somebody reading the police reports for the first two crimes, and in all reality, only the first two crimes, Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, would fall under this term hoax, that they would be hoaxes. As previously stated, Lake Berryessa was a copycat, and then the Stein murder was more or less something that became somewhat of a more elaborate hoax, I guess you'd call it, because it has the piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. And even though Thomas Horan has a suspect for writing the letters, whom he names as Hal Snook, he says that Hal Snook did not steal the piece of shirt from the crime lab or the crime scene. Instead, he states that an active participant stole it and provided it to Hal Snook, and I guess that more or less is the nutshell version of the hoax theory. Now, Thomas Horan has changed his theory many times. He has looked at many different suspects many times. And I guess though, if we actually just want to look at the major points that have been discussed throughout the hoax theory and provide the skeptical alternatives, I would say that the biggest reason why I never endorsed that particular theory is because I always said a single serial killer could have done it. It doesn't have to be this multiple killers operation. If you go back to my old black box recordings from 2019, you'll hear me saying all of that stuff. You know, it's still possible that one person committed the crimes, just in different ways, and ultimately, that is where I stand today. And some of the other criticisms that the hoax theory has received is Thomas Horan was very simply just taking the different roles of the Zodiac Killer and attributing them to different people. Well, the Lake Herman Road shooter was a different person, the Blue Rock Springs shooter was a different person, the letter writer was a different person, the Lake Berryessa stabber was a different person, the Stein murderer was a different person, and the piece of the bloody shirt was supplied by a different person, and he's just attributing the different roles to different people, and it's almost as if it's a type of mental error, so to speak. Those are the criticisms that he has received for the Zodiac hoax theory. But what do you guys think? Zodiac hoax, or do you think that this was a planned set of murders that took place, and that there was either a single killer or an organized group of killers that committed the Zodiac hoax, that committed the Zodiac murders of 1968 and 69, excuse me. And back in 2020, one of the things that I did for the channel, which I actually think was somewhat beneficial, was I organized the terminologies that are used in the Zodiac Killer mystery. For example, you would have the multiple killers theory, the group murder theory, the hoax theory, the single killer theory. And I used to just use the term group murder theory for everything, but some guy, his name is actually Roland Marshall Downs, he was a longtime listener of the program, who pointed out that you can have multiple killers without an organized group, and that's where the hoax theory falls in. The multiple killers theory should be an umbrella term, and then you have different types of multiple killers that could have operated. In the hoax theory, that would be an example of killers who are operating where there is no organized group. As previously stated, somebody was writing letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit by reading police reports. And then with the group murder theory, that would be an organized group of individuals who specifically plan the Zodiac murders and try to make people think that it was one killer. And as a case in point, you would have something like the partnership. That's one of the biggest ones that gets discussed. There were two killers. That would be one. But I also told you guys about how Lake Berryessa could have been a copycat. That would be a variant of the multiple killers theory. That would be a group that is not organized, or that would be killers that aren't connected. A partnership would be killers that are connected, and some people think that there were 4 different killers, the 4 horsemen theory, that also falls into this umbrella term multiple killers theory. So it's like we have the hoax theory, group murder theory, and the partnership theory, and the Lake Berryessa copycat theory. There are various different aspects of the Zodiac hoax theory. But there is one thing that I left out that I would like to share with you real fast, and that would be that somebody made that prank call on July 5th of 1969, right, in the hoax theory, and they just said that. They had no idea that they were opening that can of worms, that somebody was going to take that seriously, and then that person, the hoaxer, spent 3 weeks putting in a plan to make everybody think that there was some type of Zodiac persona out there. Then the copycat could have made the phone call after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the copycat was like, all right, I'm going to do exactly what he did after the Blue Rock Springs shooting. So there are explanations as to how these things could come together, but at the end of the day, I still have to think that that is just going too far and too wide. It literally is attributing the different roles of the Zodiac Killer to different people, and I'm always going to be thinking more strongly of either a single killer theory or an organized group theory. Let me know what you think about the Zodiac hoax theory. You can drop your ideas in the comments section down below, and I might watch Jimmy Akin's next video on Mysterious World, might give him a chance, but I was not impressed at all by his presentation of the Zodiac hoax theory in part 2. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shoutout on Zodiac Monday. And our first one goes to Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with these shorts and reels that come out Monday through Friday, talking all about serial killers, true crime news, and anything under the sun or in the darkness. And the shorts come out on Facebook, Instagram, and here on YouTube. My Instagram page is blackboxonlineradio and Facebook blackboxonlineradio. And our next one goes to River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is another regular and consistent supporter. Thank you so much as well for supporting Zodiac Monday over the years. And of course we also have CZ Guy. CZ Guy is another regular and consistent supporter, and CZ Guy and River Prawn Pottery and Batman66, you guys are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for everything that you have done for BBOR. And I would also like to give a shout out to Quentin Broom, who recommended the Jack Rosewood books, and they are going to be worked into a lot of episodes of Black Box Online Radio. I particularly would like to go through Jack Rosewood's book on the serial killer Herbert Mullen, the true story of the psychopath of Santa Cruz, because I think that there are a lot of psychological observations that could even be tied into cases like the Zodiac Killer or Jack the Ripper. And I would also like to give a shout out to somebody on buymeacoffee.com, and this one is going to go to Phil and Sammy Adventures, who says, Congrats on 6K, Ned. That's 6,000 subscribers. I always look forward to your Zodiac report each Monday. Have a good one. Well, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. But I noticed, though, that in the comments section, there was a set of questions from Phil and Sammy Adventures, and I would actually like to read that for you right now. And it says, "Hey Ned, have you checked out any of the 5-part series, more parts are scheduled, on the boy who became the Zodiac on a dark fairy tale channel?" And my honest answer is no, but those videos have been recommended to me. I'm going to be doing that one in the near future. Just curious what your thoughts are. It seems pretty interesting. I'll admit I sometimes get easily influenced, but it's just that I want this dang case solved. And the next question is, have you watched the Savage and Zodiac Killer Caller Part 1 and 2 on the Rock and Roll Friday channel? I thought this phone call was interesting, as well as some 20 years ago. All the best. And I really do thank you, Sammy, Phil and Sammy, for that. Now, have I watched and listened to those calls, exactly called Savage and the Zodiac Killer? Yes. And I heard those back in 2011. And it's something that I haven't talked about in a very long time because that's really what set everything off for me. Listening to that, and the caller was actually named Lyndon Lafferty, who went on to write the book, The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up, also known as The Silence Badge. I was just watching all types of YouTube videos at the time, as well as listening to all types of talk radio segments that had been uploaded to YouTube, and one of them happened to be from the Savage Nation, and I just clicked on this thing called Savage and Zodiac Killer Caller, and Lyndon Lafferty was not scheduled to be a guest on the program. He just called in, and he simply just said that the authorities have known the identity of the Zodiac Killer for decades, but they choose not to act. And that completely caught me off guard. I was thinking, what? What is this? What's going on? And Lyndon Lafferty was advertising himself as a member of law enforcement, which he was, and although he wasn't a detective on the case, he was a highway patrolman, but he didn't share that at the time. So I was just listening, with open ears, I would say, to Lyndon Lafferty, and I was like, I have to know more about this. He's talking about the Zodiac Killer, the killer that I saw on America's Most Wanted, the killer from the Fincher film, the one that I saw on the History Channel. I mean, I knew who the Zodiac was, but I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole until I listened to that segment. But one thing that still surprises me is my instincts were pushing me toward looking at different suspects. I was like, okay, Lafferty seems to have his suspect, but if this is an unsolved case, then I should look at the other suspects as well. And I spent countless hours on ZodiacKiller.com, even if I had read somebody's suspect profile, whether it was Richard Gaikowski or Ted Kaczynski's was up there for a very long time. I read those things over and over again to a point where it was unhealthy, even though I had already encountered the information. But yes, I went down the Zodiac rabbit hole for about 3 months, and I made a lot of observations about the case, but I didn't know where to share them exactly. But, as life would have it, I started my YouTube channel in 2017, Black Box Online Radio, and I decided, well, that's the time. And this was actually mentioned in my very first Zodiac Killer episode, Zodiac Killer Lyndon Lafferty Theory, which was an old black box recording. I mean, it's still online. You guys don't have to listen to it because it's done in the old black box podcast format. And that is absolutely what set everything off for me. And I mean, I guess I've been hooked on the Zodiac Killer mystery ever since. And much like some of these people have said, like even Phil and Sammy are saying that right here in the comment section. Just curious. I'll admit I sometimes get easily influenced. It's just I want this dang case solved. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, that's it. And you just want to know who the Zodiac Killer was. But I am going to check out that series that you recommended because even YouTube has recommended it to me. So thank you, Phil and Sammy Adventures on buymeacoffee.com. And without further ado, I would like to bring Sam Fisher back on the program. He is the author of The Zodiac Killer Identity, and he's going to continue the discussions on his suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin.
But I can tell you that that's, like, if you take all of these clues together, like it's kind of like a little bit eerie about how you can take these things. So like the Z18, okay, so we have the number 18. Let's look at the 18th word, right? And oddly enough, the name James touches the 18th letter in the Sieg Heil. So those are two like observations about the 408 that I've sort of like I've observed, but so but you can't really prove, like it's just an observation at this point. So my next sort of observation on the that I find a little bit interesting on the Z408 is there's a misspelling at the 58th word. So this the number 58 to me is a little bit interesting, because if you add up all of the if you convert the letters of the zodiac into numbers and then you add that all up, it comes out to the number 58. Well, the 58th word in the Z408 is also misspelled, and you can also somewhat make out the name James in there too as well,
And can I
right?
provide a little bit of context for the audience? Because we've had the opportunity to talk in the past,
Yeah.
your suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin, had a form of OCD called arithmomania, right? And he
Yes.
had a particular connection to the number eight. It was part of his
Yes.
obsessive compulsive disorder. So when you're saying
Yes.
that there are all these eight patterns and numbers ending in eight and 18, 408, 58, that would relate back to his arithmomania, allegedly, of course.
Yeah, and it's not just a number 8, but like people with arithmomania can have obsessions with other numbers. So it can be like a long string of numbers. So the number 3, 8, 13, 18, 23. I think I think according to one book, like, he also had a thing for the number 63, right? And probably, like, I can't confirm it, but I'm pretty sure 80, 81, and 88, things like that. And when you go on, if you really want to go in depth on it, like when you go like on the Reddit forum for arithmomania, there's like a lot of their behavior, like is it like it's really interesting, because people with that also tend to have sort of an obsession with time and dates, and like things that like the average person wouldn't sort of, they can't grasp. So for example, like another common thing is they have a thing for even numbers. They have to do things in even numbers, or maybe somebody else has to do things in prime numbers, right? So or multiples. So like people can have an obsession with multiples of 3. So they have to do things in multiples of 3. So they have to do things in 3, 6, 9. There are people that are obsessed with counting words in sentences, people that are obsessed with converting letters to numbers and adding up those. Well, I know Franklin's OCD was bad enough to where in later years it was described that he would have people that wanted to visit him, but he had to sort of convert your name into numbers and add up the numbers of your name to see whether or not it added up to sort of like a good number or bad number. And based on this, he would make decisions,
I
right?
see. So, sounds like he's just heavily involved with the patterns themselves. And also, it ties back to something about how some people think the Zodiac might have been playing his own number games and that the numbers that he
Yeah.
used were not arbitrary.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about the
Yeah.
Z13 and the eights there too, but we won't get that far ahead.
Yeah, we're gonna have to circle back to this concept, because it keeps, like, I've got a lot to say getting into it. So so I'll trying to think of how to wrap up. My last observation on the Z18 is I I think that maybe possibly, I originally, like I said, I originally thought that the Z18 would be sort of like some sort of code for either one of his names, but I'm not so sure now, because I think that that may very well sort of mess up the perfect number of 100. And oddly enough, if you want to know how that number 18 pops up yet again at the end, so not only is there the Z18, but then you also, if you so each section of the 408 is comprised of exactly 136 characters. if you subtract the 18 from the 136, it's like the last section, which is the third section of the Z408, is exactly 118 characters. Plus the 18 undeciphered. So it's like in some weird way you've got the number 118 and then 18 with exactly 100 words. And that's kind of how I interpret the Z408. Right? Is that like you just gotta keep looking at these different numbers. Like I've tried looking at the numbers, the 80th word and the 81st word. I didn't particularly find anything. Um, but but those are just some of my observations, like when it comes to my suspect there.
All right, and that's covering the 408 cipher. But then the
Yeah.
next thing we would have chronologically would be the late Berryessa stabbing.
Okay.
Any observations about that you would like to share?
Yeah, quite a bit actually. So I'll start it off with a commentary on, yeah. So well, actually, so I'm sorry. Let me just back up with another quick observation from August of '69,
Sure.
real quick. I recently found, when it comes to Franklin, like I've found it very interesting that there was actually an attack in Vallejo on Black Panther headquarters, and they still have never find out who did this. There was a firebomb attack, and apparently when police showed up, um, they blamed the police because, mind you, racial tensions were very high at that time, right? It quite honestly, I think it dominated the news cycle, not dominated, but like it was a very big part of politics at the time. Being being so much into sort of racial ideology, um, I have sometimes theorized that this would also explain, um, in later letters, the attack, now in August, and the by fire he later referenced in the Halloween card. I don't know for sure. I just wanted to throw out that observation that, I think that this attack happened on, I think it was on August 19th. I think the attack on the Black Panther headquarters. The local police did not know. They couldn't find out who did it, so they blamed the Black Panthers themselves. The Black Panthers, obviously, they thought that that was an attack. Um, that I mean, of course, they they came out and said that they didn't do it. But they apparently they wouldn't talk to the police about it. Um, but I thought that that attack was pretty interesting because it could explain the August reference in the by fire, right? But I don't know. I just so moving on to a little bit further, I can place him in Louisiana State University at the end of, I think, the last day of '69 or the 1st of August, 1st of September. And he got in a car with David Duke and a guy named uh, Don Black, I think, who later went on to sort of like he founded like the website, one of these like neo-Nazi websites. So he's riding in a car, and they go to Washington D.C. for a Nazi rally. This is the first week of September. Um, the trail goes cold after there because he got kicked out of the Nazi headquarters for something. He was described as being very sick, even by other Nazis. From what I gather, like he didn't fit in with even the Nazis. They kicked him out for some reason. I haven't been able to figure out what that reason is. Um, don't know where he went. So I think that what he did was he drove, found his way back in California, um, for the attack on Lake Berryessa, which, getting into my commentary there, um, I I've never been able to sort of figure out like how accurate that attack scene was. And the reason I've been wanting to figure that out is because, remember, Franklin is virtually blind in his right eye. So when he comes in that movie scene from Zodiac, he comes at them, um like as Brian and Cecilia are looking at him, he is up a little bit up the hill and to the left. Well, I've often thought, well, like if you see how he holds his gun is held in front of his stomach, right? As if he has to look out of his left side of his eyes to see properly. And if this is the case, then that would be because Franklin was blind in his right eye. And then I got to looking at that movie scene, and I'm thinking, well, if he's blind in his right eye, he has to move to his right in order to keep both of them in his field of vision, which he actually does in that movie scene. Like if you look in that movie scene, he goes he holds the gun in front of his stomach, points it at them, and then moves, sidestepping down to his right and Brian and Cecilia's left. Basically, because and the reason he can't move to his left is because if Brian and Cecilia run, they will run into his blindsided eye. Like he wouldn't be able to see them or shoot properly because he's blind in his right eye. So he has to move to his right. So I've always wondered, and I've never been able to kind of sort of get a clear picture of whether or not, like how accurate is that movie scene? Because that to me that makes a big difference. Those like little details, right? So um, another sort of commentary, like when it comes to Joseph Paul Franklin, is and you can make a commentary on this, Ned. Like he uses like he uses the word hot, right? Like didn't he say my car is hot?
Yes.
Right. Okay, so Franklin said that. That's how he would talk. And I know that from interviews in later years, like I've got it somewhere. I've got the transcripts. He referred in later years like, yeah, my gun was hot, so I had to get rid of it. My car was hot, I had to get rid of it. That's how that like I said, that's how Franklin talked. Like he obviously had an Alabama accent. So I think that could explain like sort of like the drawl that you heard Brian Hartnell talk about, right? Um, so getting more into this and like the clues pointing to Joseph Paul Franklin, it's like so um so concocting a story in order to get his victims to do what he wanted is something that Franklin actually admitted was part of a routine. Like he once said in a prison interview, and this is actually on YouTube somewhere. I can send you the link maybe sometime. But he said he actually came out and said, yeah, like you, I forgot the exact words on how he put it, but he admitted to using stories to lull these victims into a sense of like, as long as you comply, you'll live. Well, like he had done that. He had done this, right? Um, so there's that. Um, I'm trying to think of the use of I know that like in the book Dark Soul of the South, um he was described as like as a kid he always wanted to play the villain. The use of all black clothing was something that uh the author described like as a kid, he wanted like he liked to dress up in all black. He liked to dress up as the villain. He was obsessed with outlaws of the old west. He was obsessed with both comic books and bank robbers and outlaws like Billy the Kid and James Harden. Um, and let's see, was getting into um, now as far as like the stabbing itself. I'm trying to think of anything else. I know that there was other things. I just can't exactly think of them right now. But yeah, those are. Oh, almost forgot. That was a 10.5 inch shoe size that they're looking for, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. He's size 10.5. So there's that, right? So what I think happened is I think that he um I think that he was trying to copy all the media attention that Charles Manson had got with the stabbings, and that he had seen how much like media attention these stabbings over. In later years, Franklin admitted to basically he was described as idolizing Charles Manson in later years by John Douglas, the FBI profiler. So, because of course Douglas had interviewed Franklin multiple times, and he said that Franklin was obsessed with Charles Manson and his idea for race war. I don't think at that time that for whatever reason, what was going on in his head, I don't think at that time he was like trying to start a race war. We like the 3 years that we know that he was killing, that's what he was trying to do. But I think that like my personal belief is that he was trying to gain as much media attention to start some sort of like revolution against the government. I think that that's like, but then again, it's like who knows, right? Who knows what he was thinking? So getting into
Next, we
so
would
we
have to
can
merge nine, unless you have something else you'd like to share about Lake Berryessa.
I think those are sort of like the main points. What I think happened was how he operated in later years was he immediately got rid of the murder weapons. So what I think happened was after he committed the crime and of course wrote on the car door, he later then called from a phone booth, right? So or like he later called in his own crimes. Franklin, I know on at least one occasion did the same exact thing. Like he went to a phone booth and called. And this was after, and the reason I know this is because this was after the shooting of Larry Flint. So this is something that, of course, they didn't put in the movie. But what happened, like if you read the transcripts, and I actually sent you, I think in one of those files I sent you, I think that's the transcript. After he shot Larry Flint, Franklin, I think, just drove down the street or something. He called from a phone booth. He called the local courthouse and told them that they don't need, basically in the gist of what he said was, you don't need to worry about Larry Flint, that Jesus Christ is taking care of it. And apparently he just hung up or something. Maybe the courthouse hung up on him or something, but he admitted that in a prison interview. So here you have a guy who, in my opinion, I think besides age, he fits the description. He's got reddish hair, reddish curly hair. Like obviously, like if you look at the pictures, I know it's very generic, but you know, guy with glasses. He's got the widow's peak. He's got a 10.5-inch shoe. I'm sorry, I forgot about this. Like he refers to his victims as wild game as well. He refers to his activities as hunting. He calls from a phone booth after he committed a sniper attack. Right. So we're I'm sorry, did you want to move on to the next?
Yes, why don't we move on to Paul Stein right now, and then I have some questions for you, but we can talk about Paul Stein first.
Okay, on the Paul Stein, I'm trying to think. The big thing, the big thing there that I'm taking away, just for the sake of time, I'm just going to try and move along quickly so you can get into sort of like a question and answer. Was I think that the age is way off, and I know that that's not. I'm going against probably the entire Zodiac community when I say this, but like, I'll tell you why. So we have multiple witnesses that put him in his late 30s and 40s, right? But when I asked the question, uh, like when you're talking about like kind of somewhat low light, when I've asked the question like why do all these people put him in his 30s and 40s? Like nobody has ever been able to answer. What was it? Was it the wrinkles? I mean, did you see wrinkles in his eyes? Did you see? So the only answer that I can think of is the widow's peak, and the widow's peak was something that he had, like as far as I know, Joseph Franklin had a widow's peak his entire life. So when he cut his, I'm assuming that he had probably cut his hair after the Lake Berryessa. Even at 18, 19, like something like 5 to 10% of teenage boys will have a widow's peak. Franklin's widow's peak was a very pronounced widow's peak hairline. So together with the fact that, like, as far as I can tell, I know in his 20s he was into weightlifting. So he's like a so at his height was about 5'10", 5'11". He took good care of his health. So he was at least in his 20s described as like kind of a beefy 185 to 200-pound man. I don't know what I don't know what he looked like at 18, but I can definitely tell you that there's a good chance that even at 18, 19, he most likely had a widow's peak. So if he would have cut his hair to the crew cut style, I've often wanted to ask people, like, why this detail is very important. Why did you place him in his 30s, 40s? Like, and people just constantly say, well, that's what a 30, 40-year-old will look like. Well, yeah, but why? Was it gray hair? Was it wrinkles? Was it widow's peak? If it's widow's peak, you can't rule out Franklin then.
Well, is that a
You- you-
challenge question you want me to answer?
Either for you, for your audience, I'd like to know, like to know people's opinion, because I've never gotten a satisfactory opinion on that. Like,
Now,
I'm not. Yeah, go ahead.
we have two different sets of people after the Stein murder that were saying that he has the kind of a 30s, 40s age estimation. We have the Robbins kids. Then we have Officer Falk. And Officer Falk, who saw the Zodiac, said that he had hair that was graying in the rear, or something to the effect of his hair was possibly graying in the rear. Now, then, when the composite sketch was drawn, they then attributed the younger age to it that went back much younger than what Officer Falk said, because Officer Falk is the one who estimated in the early 40s, and I'm only answering that purely as a sake of for the sake of the challenge question. But it does seem like the Mayor Robbins kids originally thought that maybe he was older, and then Falk thought that he was older. But I'm going to also provide one response to what you just stated there. Did people see things like wrinkles? I think the answer to that would have to be no, because almost certainly they wouldn't be able to make out those types of features from like 50 feet away in the dark.
Correct.
You know,
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It has to be widow's peak.
well,
It has
Officer
to be.
Falk is the one who said their hair graying in the rear, and he was, of course, going past him on the street. That was
Yeah.
But with the Robbins kids, I don't see how they could have made out things like, oh, he has a wrinkly face or something. I mean, they're seeing this guy for like
Yeah.
moments, really. I know he
Yeah.
lingers at the
Exactly.
back for a little while, but it's not going to be a long amount of time. So
Yeah.
I don't think that composite sketch is the most helpful.
Yeah. And so I get why. Like, I'm not knocking people or the community for saying that he is most likely in his 30s, because that's what the descriptions are. But when you start digging into the details, I've noticed that like people get very angry when you start asking, well, why? Why did you have him at 35, 40, 45, whatever, right? And I get that Fuchs said he had maybe had a little gray, but my question there is, like, so if his hair was as short as what it looks like how could you see like, so it looks like he had like this like really short crew cut, right? Like, how could you see gray in the back of his head when his hair is that short, right? And there's some questions on Fuchs' credibility too, right? So like there's so many so getting, like, if we're gonna really dig into his age, like, I gotta add my 2 cents here, is when you really start to analyze the linguistics of some of his word usage, um it, to me, like, I can tell you why. There's like, it's like phrase after phrase points to a younger man. Starting with, like, let's get back to the 408, and Ned, push back all you want on some of this, like, but something else that I've really broken away from the Zodiac community in general is Like the term "getting your rocks off," right? That he says in the Z408. Like when you start researching that, that's something that a young person at that time would say, right? And like I know that the hardened said, well, that's not something that the young people would say. Well, when you start to research that, that's not exactly true, right? So that like and this is I'm telling you, I can quote from like if you look this up in what they call Google Ngrams, right? And then like that word usage doesn't come into like mainstream use until like the mid 60s, right? And yeah, sure, somebody older could say it, but it points younger. Um, the use of the word, when he says the blue meanies, like I don't know, have you ever seen that cartoon that like about the blue meanie? I can't even remember what the
Yellow
right.
Submarine.
Yeah. Have you watched that?
Some of it. I mean, like, I haven't watched the whole thing straight through, but some of it.
Um, but in my opinion, it's like that thing is so bizarre. Granted, you're talking about a bizarre individual. I get it. But that even for the time, that's something a younger person. He's concerned about like the buttons that people are wearing. In my opinion, that points younger because that was something that young people cared about. He's able to seemingly blend in where young people go. Um, you get what I'm saying here. There's and like at every step of the way, um, and again, this isn't really a knock on the Zodiac community because they've got to go with witness descriptions. But when you look at like a pattern of like linguistic stuff, like it points younger, like in my
Now, you
opinion.
said that I could provide as much pushback as I wanted. So, you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Overall, firstly, I do appreciate you sharing everything that you have just laid out. And I think that perhaps some of the biggest concerns that people have about Franklin as a suspect is some of these observations that you have, even though they are accurate, are a little bit simple and they could also be created by chance, such as the
Hmm.
connections to the number 8 or some of these patterns that have been found in the 408 cipher. You know
Hmm.
this just as well as anyone. Lots
Yeah.
of people have made observations about the ciphers and the letters and the misspellings, and they have their own mathematical sets of observations that have been made.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
not all of them can be perfectly in alignment, mathematically speaking. And also, using certain linguistic things like saying my car is hot, and Joseph Paul Franklin used that verbiage. Well,
Hmm.
that again is also a common expression. I've definitely heard that before, the Zodiac Killer mystery. I wouldn't say that I use it myself, but I definitely knew what he was talking about when I read that. And that
Hmm.
also seems like something that is made an accurate statement on your part, but at the same time, that could just be the contemporary parlance of the time. Now, I get everything that you're saying about blue meanies, yellow submarine, buttons. Yes,
Hmm.
that both might seem like something that a younger person would do, but I don't know about you. I'm 37, and a couple days ago, I was watching the Power Rangers. I would do things
Hmm.
that young people might do, and every now and then, not like all the time. So I definitely think that that's possible. And I'm sure you've dealt with some of these criticisms before, right?
Oh yeah. I know what the criticisms are. I very well know, and it's not new to me. But like I get what you're saying. My issue with um how the Zodiac community has treated is um they treat it as if this stuff will rule him out, and it doesn't, right? They and that's been my sort of issue with how the Zodiac community, like they will not even accept anybody outside the age range. I mean, like I don't know too much about Morse suspect, but I think Morse suspect is in the same boat where he's, people say he's way too young, and like I think in his early 20s or something like that.
24, 23,
24,
24.
and they say, wow, that's just like way too young. Um, I So to push back on how these investigations go. So let me let me tell you another observation. So so the first murder, they didn't have any witnesses or anything. They didn't have anything to go on. So it's understandable that like they're looking for other high school students or whatever. So but basically they're looking for a younger person. But they really don't know. They're looking for a younger person after the Blue Rock Springs attack. They're looking for a younger person after the Lake Berryessa attack. Right? You see what I'm saying here? And um voice descriptions were younger. I think Brian Hartnell said that he could be a student. He sounds like a student or whatever, right?
I'm sorry, what did
Um,
you mean by voice descriptions?
so the voice description,
Oh,
like when he called
The
the
voice. Sorry, I
voice
thought you.
descriptions, yeah, yeah. So everything, and they were looking for a younger person. Um, even after like the Paul Stein, like when you get closer to time and location, they were still looking. Even after the Presidio, they were still looking for somebody younger. So I wonder, um, I wonder what changed. Like, how did this idea that he was in his well, not no, I understand. Like it was like the Robbins that in Fook that had put like all these witnesses placed him in his 30s, 40s, right? Kind of an older man. I get it. But um but that's been sort of like um that's been sort of used to cross out people, I think, a little bit unfairly, like given that there is indications that point to something else, right? So um um
But
but
there are several other criticisms of your observations about Joseph Paul Franklin that we can talk
mhm.
about real fast. And because you said that I could give as much pushback as I wanted,
Yeah,
I
yeah, go ahead.
share some things that I do genuinely think about the mathematical coincidences or just common verbiage at the time. But I
Mhm,
think that the harshest critics of your observations are the ones who point to the neo-Nazi ideology and the racism when
mhm.
they point out that Joseph Paul Franklin seemed to be racially motivated. And if you want to talk
Yeah.
about him as a suspect in the Black Panther bombing, okay, well,
Mhm,
I mean, sure, even I would be open ears for that. But the Zodiac killer's victims were not black, and the Zodiac killer's victims were white Caucasians. And also, Joseph Paul Franklin also committed that sniper attack that you mentioned involving Larry Flint, which is perhaps
mhm,
his most famous crime, the attempted murder of Larry Flint. And the
mhm,
Zodiac doesn't seem to be committing crimes like that. I mean, the Zodiac does not seem like he's targeting
mhm,
blacks or Latinos. The Zodiac murders that we have all gone through are of
mhm.
white Caucasians. So, how do you reconcile that with your theory?
Um, yeah, no, and that I have to that's been something I haven't been able to answer is like why did he specifically target young white teens? Like um yeah, victimology. Victimology is I gotta admit it's a huge problem for looking at Joseph Paul Franklin as a Zodiac killer. But I do have some slight comments to say. So what we know about Joseph Paul Franklin is that many of his victims were white women. Um, and usually when he when he killed those young white women in West Virginia, it was um he later admitted that what had happened was that he had picked up the hitchhikers and then he had they had admitted one of them had admitted to sleeping with a non-white person, and the other one admitted that they would if given the chance, and so he decided to kill them. He did not hesitate to kill whites at all, given for given that he there was some perceived crime against like this society that he saw as what he wanted to build. So like um I uh, I'm I don't have any evidence for this, but I'm going to tell you what I think. I think that San Francisco was the hotbed of communist activity in the United States. Like that's where like a lot of the newspapers and that's where all the young people were flocking to. And Nazi ideology and super right wing pamphlets and things, like I think had provoked sort of like this anger, especially amongst like the ultra right wing conservatives against like this what they perceived as a communist invasion. Mostly, and San Francisco was like the epicenter of like this cultural revolution that was happening in the United States at the time. Um, in a later interview, like he mentioned that like what he was doing was like on par with what like Samson of the Old Testament did in the Bible, and that in which like case like when God destroyed a city, like he didn't differentiate between man, woman, and child. So like I think that what he was getting at in this interview was that he was just sort of like this soldier in a war, and that whoever got caught up, and you're basically caught up given you're just guilty by association with California, perhaps. Although I don't know, I'm just kind of theorizing. It's really hard to sort of like get in the mind of somebody so bizarre. I don't think that you can necessarily completely rule him out based on like that there was some reason like why he decided that he was going to do what he did.
And once again, I would like to thank Sam Fisher for appearing on Black Box Online Radio's Zodiac Monday, and I also would invite anybody to give some feedback to Sam in the comments section down below. I would also request that everybody please be respectful to the guests, but share what you genuinely think just in a respectful way. And you guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there is also blackboxned88 on Instagram, and I use these pages to release shorts and reels Monday through Friday. You guys already know all about that, so I'll also let you know that this show is available for free downloads anywhere you get your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime, and there is also True Crime Designs on Facebook. The images that you see from this program are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook. Please follow. And other than that, I will just say that I will be with you tomorrow for a new episode about JonBenet Ramsey. This show comes to you Monday through Friday talking about unsolved mysteries. Feel free to start your day with some mystery talk in the morning. On Mondays about the Zodiac Killer, on Tuesdays about JonBenet Ramsey, on Wednesdays about Jack the Ripper, on Thursdays about the Black Dahlia, and on Fridays about D.B. Cooper. And I'll be with you tomorrow for a new episode about JonBenet. And until then, goodbye.